All right. Well, I'm going to do just a brief introduction, folks. Just want to say good afternoon. My name is Sam Larson, and I'm the interim director for the Whitburn Center for Governance and Policy Research at UW-Oshkosh. The Whitburn Center briefly was started back in 2021 with a donation from our founding benefactor, Jerry Whitburn. But today we are gathering as the third in a monthly series that we launched with the Wisconsin Alliance for Civic Trust, or WISACT. And Whitburn has essentially assumed leadership of that initiative here over the summer. Which was founded by a cross-partisan team. So both former Republican Governor Scott McCallum and then a retired Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel journalist and senior editor David Haynes, who served as the Democratic co-lead on that. And essentially, WISACT was founded around kind of three principles. One was focusing on how to build and rebuild trust in our political system and our government institutions. Two, in supporting fair, safe, and secure elections. And then three, encouraging peaceful engagement across the political and social spectrum. And so really, our monthly events want to focus in on those issues, bring together people from multiple viewpoints to focus on solutions around these issues and create space for discussion in that. And so I just want to welcome everyone again. We're glad you're here, and I'll just hand things over to our moderator for today, Areli Alvarez, who's an MPA student at UW-Oshkosh and a research assistant with us at the Whitburn Center. And we are lucky to have her leading us today. So kick it off, Areli, and thanks everyone again for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Larson. I'm going to start sharing a presentation and then we can go from there. All right. Is everyone able to see? Okay, perfect. So today's event is titled Representative Ahmad Rivera-Wagner and the Resilience of Democracy in Action. Dr. Larson kind of already went over the Whitburn Center, but just to reiterate, the Whitburn Center is housed in UW-Oshkosh. It conducts nonpartisan practical and applied research. Also manages WISACT. So like Dr. Larson said as well, WISACT focuses on promoting safe, secure, and fair elections, peaceful engagements, and civic trust. So our student staff. So I am Areli Alvarez. I am currently a master's student at UW-Oshkosh, getting my master's in public administration. I am also the graduate research assistant. Our two other student staff, Amanda Pyron, she's a political science and social science education major, and Aspen Rafak is a political science major. So we will be speaking with Representative Ahmad today. So this is just a very, very quick snapshot because he has an impressive background. But he is the state representative for Assembly District 90 in Green Bay. He is the chair for the Housing Working Group and the co-chair for the Diversity Inclusion Task Force through the Greater Green Bay Chamber of Commerce. And he is also the former chief of staff for the mayor's office here in Green Bay. All right, so before we get started, I would like to take us back to the year 2020 in Green Bay. So in March of 2020, the COVID-19 outbreak began. Many people like myself thought that we were getting an extended spring break, but that was not the case. As COVID developed, we were filled with more uncertainty and fear than ever. We did not know what the future held for us. At the same time, 2020 was filled with important political events. In the summer of 2020, Green Bay had protests from the Black Lives Matter national movement. In total, about 2,500 people participated in the demonstrations in the city. That is the largest movement to ever happen in Green Bay's history, and one of the largest to happen across the whole country. So the picture at the bottom here is just a photograph of one of the many protests that happened across the city. So all of this meant that we had more active political and social justice scene in the area at the time. We had an empowered community. Unfortunately, some of these events did not go as planned, but regardless of this, Green Bay felt empowered during a time filled with uncertainty. 2020 was also a big year for Wisconsin because we had two big elections, the Wisconsin Supreme Court race and the presidential election. The Supreme Court race came right after COVID began. The state and the city alike began trying to prepare to have a statewide race while undergoing a pandemic. The state pushed the mail-in ballot dates in hope to accommodate the social distancing restrictions at the time. In addition to this, there were only two polling locations open compared to the, I believe, 35 that are total in the city. So there was a lot going on, a lot of changes, right? After the April election, the city began to prepare for the presidential election and revisited how all the COVID protocols went during April. At this point, everyone was quarantined, and the idea of going outside and interacting with people was frightening. I mean, it was a crazy time, right? Nobody wanted to be outside. Everyone was terrified. So for the city, it was all hands on deck to try to find a safe and effective solution for a presidential election. A few key developments happened in the months leading up to the election itself. More mail-in votes were expected to happen due to social distancing. This led to skepticism over voter fraud because there would be so many more absentee votes. In fact, in Green Bay, there are about 33,000 requests for absentee ballots. That is about 11 times the amount that is normally requested during a presidential election year. So just with that, that is a big undertaking, right? The city also just accepted a grant from the Center for Tech and Civic Life to help during this time. The grant was meant to aid in funding for the election for things like educating the public on absentee voting, personal protective equipment, just hand sanitizer, masks, those basic needs, ballot scanners and openers, among a lot of other things. Finally, there was a need to move the central count location from the city office to the KI Convention Center because of the amount of space needed. This sparked a lot of debate because moving the ballots themselves seemed risky and could lead to errors. Now, this is not the end of the story, nor is it all the details you need, but it's just a snapshot of what Green Bay looked like in 2020. I would like to continue discussing this with Representative Ahmad, but before we get into that, I would like to ask Representative Ahmad if you could just tell us about your background and how you ended up in Green Bay.
Yeah, I would love to before we get into all the meat of this.
Yeah.
I was raised by a single mom who had me at 16. We experienced homelessness for the first part of my life, and two things really changed my life. One was a program called Habitat for Humanity, where we literally built the house that my mom currently lives in. We didn't ask people their political affiliation or where they've come from or how they show up. They just wanted to make a difference in people's lives. And the second was helping my mom form a union of home health care workers. Those are folks that go into people's homes to help them live with dignity if they have a physical limitation, if they're aging in place, or they might have some mental challenges that they need extra support. And so, helping my mom form a union and building her home with perfect strangers is really what led me into politics. But why I'm here is I married the son of dairy farmers, and they still have a dairy farm right outside of Madison and Middleton, Wisconsin. And when I moved here, this was right before the pandemic. We moved here and introduced myself to the mayor of Green Bay, and ultimately went on to work for him as a community liaison, later as his chief of staff, and then most recently I ran for office just this last year, and I now serve as the state representative for the 90th district, which is my entire district is the city of Green Bay. So it's been a wild journey to get
Yeah.
here, but very proud to represent the city.
Oh, of course. Could you tell us why you decided to run for state assembly?
Well, one of the things that inspired me is what we're going to be talking about today. Um, you know, on January 6th of 2021, we saw protests here in Green Bay and in the Capitol. But here in Green Bay, they actually called for the Proud Boys to attack myself, the mayor of Green Bay, and the first Black clerk, accusing us of stealing the 2020 election. And why that really shaped me to run is I realized that wasn't the Green Bay I knew. The Green
Mhm.
Bay I knew was my neighbor made me cookies for Christmas and has done that every year for the last
Mhm.
decade, before she even knew my name. My other neighbor put out a water bowl for my adorable golden doodles, Appa and Lambo, and does that every day because she just thought the dogs needed some water on their walk. We're a community that takes care of each other. We have
Mhm.
our own government-run amusement park. We have
Mhm.
one of the best universities, in my opinion,
Mhm.
UWGB, right here in the city. We're a place that has a wildlife sanctuary. We are a blue-collar community that
Yeah.
truly is rooted in neighborliness and kindness. And watching these folks call for the Proud Boys to come physically attack the mayor of the city and his chief of staff and the first black clerk meant that the politics were the problem, not the people. And so one of the reasons I ran for office is to ensure that we had folks that would put people over politics and ensure that
Mhm.
our democracy would stand the test of these pressures, that at the end of the day, these folks don't represent them. So I was proud to run a campaign rooted on taking care of our folks, on housing, on community,
Mhm.
making sure people had access to a good job, but even more so that they get to choose the leaders that they want to choose, and that extremism can't infiltrate our system to make it harder for our democracy to work. And so I ran, I won,
Mhm.
and we've been making sure that to make sure that our democracy is intact, and that
Yeah.
while we're making sure our democracy is intact, that we're making sure everyday people have material positive outcomes in their life. And so to me, those things are tied together.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. So now I would like to kind of shift us towards the 2020 election era. So what was your role during the 2020 elections?
So I was the mayor's community liaison, and one of the things that we knew was happening because of COVID, we had lost 50% of our poll workers. So just to give that some context, the people who run our campaigns, or excuse me, our elections in the city of Green Bay are Mimas and Pop-Pops, or your
Mhm.
cousin, your friend, your neighbor. Often the average age is over 60. And so
Mhm.
with the pandemic, we knew these were people that were the most disproportionately impacted by COVID. They also felt it themselves. So the city lost 50% of its poll workers. So as the mayor's community liaison, my job was to help just the city kind of operate and work with the community. But in this case, around the elections, it was to make sure that we got a bunch of poll workers. And so we ran a bunch of bipartisan virtual town halls to
Mhm.
encourage people of all different parties, of all different backgrounds, to be poll workers for the city. And I was proud to say that we actually recruited the most diverse and the highest number of poll workers we had ever recruited in Green Bay history, doing that bipartisan campaign. And then during the campaign, during the election itself, my job was to basically give all these volunteers, and some were paid, pizza and food, and to check in the media. So part of my job was helping to make sure that media, we wanted to make this as transparent as possible.
Yeah.
So ensuring that media had access to central count. So
Yeah.
it was an easy, to me, a very exciting job. I
Yeah.
love democracy. It was encouraging getting people inspired and helping them get involved in
Mhm.
our local elections. And we recruited 750 poll workers.
Wow.
So we were incredibly proud to have
Mhm.
done that work to get that done. So I wasn't the mayor's chief of staff just yet. I would later become his chief of staff, but
Yeah.
my role in the 2020 election was helping to group poll workers and then making sure all those poll workers and staff had food and made sure that
Mhm.
folks in the media could come observe and the public could come observe the accounting process because we wanted to make sure there was as much transparency as possible.
Yeah. Thank you. So could you kind of explain your situation leading up to 2020? Maybe kind of what happened day of election?
So we knew something was amiss because actually 2 weeks before the actual election in 2020, we started seeing misinformation being spread, and pretty egregious misinformation. So there
Mhm.
was these viral Facebook posts that claimed that people had witnessed the mayor himself going into the back of City Hall, which by the way is open to the public, with machines and shredding ballots. And so we had caught that really on. So we started talking to our team, to the police, being like, this is news that there are folks concerned about things that aren't happening. Then on election day itself, we started seeing people pretending to work for the Wisconsin Election Commission, claiming that
Mhm.
their job was to audit our process. And so they started actually following and harassing our police officers who were collecting ballots at mail-in, drop-in, mail-in sites across the
Mhm.
city. Um, so we already knew that something was happening. In fact, they even started following them in cars. And then we saw them observers who
Mhm.
were claiming to have authority to inspect ballots, question people's identity. Again, this had never happened before. Most of
Mhm.
our elections have never had this many observers. We've never had people following our police department. We have never had people pretending to be
Mhm.
election officials and they weren't. They even had claimed to have fake badges. This was all new. So leading up to and the day of the election, we were seeing some of the most unorthodox and non-traditional activities
Mhm.
happening, and we started hearing about potential protest. And again, we haven't even finished counting the ballots. And what was
Mhm.
so interesting is that we had so many ballots. So we actually
Mhm.
had about 33,000
Mhm.
actual absentee ballots, the most in Green Bay history. And
Mhm.
we did not finish counting till the next day. So we did
Mhm.
nearly 24 hours of counting, over 24 hours of counting. We did not
Mhm.
finish until about 6 o'clock in the morning,
Mhm.
the day after the election, counting every absentee ballot. And
Mhm.
despite the fact that we had live streamed it, we had started seeing folks uh, called that not every the ballots weren't being counted or things were, and this is even before the
Mhm.
results were given.
Mhm.
And we were one of two communities in Wisconsin that had not gotten all their ballots. It was us in Milwaukee that were there. And then we actually started seeing protests at the central count in
Mhm.
Milwaukee and hearing about it. So election day, this was, all the protocols. We had the biggest operation we've ever had, and we started hearing misinformation, people pretending to be appointed officials, and the kind of the air of there was going to be protests because people were didn't like the results. They didn't think they were going to like the
Mhm.
results of the election. So it was what turned out to be an exciting time. Normally, it became a scary
Mhm.
time because we were unsure about what was going to happen next.
Yeah. Were there any other cities in the state that were experiencing similar issues to Green Bay?
Milwaukee. So it
Milwaukee.
became Milwaukee and Green Bay that became kind of the centerpieces of this. Madison also had a delayed count, but they had finished their
Okay.
count before we did. So Milwaukee and Green Bay were the last to finish their 2020 election counts.
Okay. Thank you. Um, so were there any key moments that happened um that day that kind of made you realize that everything was escalating?
There was one incident in particular. So we had our community service officers, which are basically our pl not plain clothes, but folks that don't usually have weapons. These are the people
Mhm.
who go to events. They were collecting the ballots and bringing them to the KI Center, and they were being harassed and followed by this group of
Mhm.
people. And when they came in to bring the ballots, they came to me to say, because I'm working in the mayor's office, we don't know who these people are. They're telling us that
Mhm.
they're officials. Can you like make sure that everything's okay? I
Mhm.
go downstairs, and these are just random people we had
Mhm.
never heard of before. And I explained to them, I work for the city.
Mhm.
These are police officers. We're not going to get in the way of their ballots, delivering them. They started screaming
Oh.
that 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 I was working for a campaign,
Mhm.
that I was a consultant and
Mhm.
trying to stop the police from delivering the ballots. So this was I mean, screaming, and
Yeah.
we actually had to get police to come in and intervene.
Mhm.
We had to like escort people out, and we were like, "What are they?" It was the strangest moment because we were like, "What are they
Yeah.
talking about? This is such a normal process." And the only
Mhm.
reason I was brought in is because the police were like, "These people are claiming to work for the city and for the
Mhm.
elections, and they were just observers, and they wanted to intervene in the process. You're not allowed to do that. You can observe
Mhm.
the process, but you cannot physically
Mhm.
interact with ballots being delivered." And we
Mhm.
had no problems for the entirety of the day and this around that. And they
Mhm.
made a big deal. They started screaming and yelling. They said, "We're filming you." We said, "You're allowed to film us." And it erupted into chaos. It ended up
Mhm.
taking 10, 15 minutes just to deliver the ballots
Mhm.
to up the stairs to
Mhm.
where people were actually counting them in full view
Mhm.
of the public.
Mhm.
And we knew that that was a sign that something was
Mhm.
wrong. that things were getting dangerous, that these observers didn't even know the process. They were attacking random people. They were harassing random people. They yelled at the police officer saying, "You work. You don't. You're supposed to be working for us. Why are you working for the Democrats?" And we're like, "What are you talking about?" Like
Mhm.
and so we knew that was the beginning of that this was not going to be a traditional election
Mhm.
and that this was not going to
Yeah.
be a traditional count.
Okay. Thank you. So between November and January, I kind of want to ask what your experience was with political violence and how it affected you personally.
So, you know, the conventional wisdom was that once the election and votes were counted, that this was over, that people were just upset about the election. It didn't go the way that some people wanted, and therefore we're in. But in Green Bay, it didn't stop. So we actually started having protests that weekend. The problem is that the protesters kept making up where they thought the ballots were. So they kept going to places where the ballots never were. So they protested at the race center, even though there were no ballots at the race center
Mhm.
in our area. Then they went to the KI center where we counted them on election day, but the ballots had already been moved to the city hall, which we had shown everyone. We live streamed the process.
Mhm.
So sometimes we didn't catch up that they were actually protesting because they were protesting in all the wrong places. So no one knew that this was building up, but we were hearing about it. So they
Mhm.
finally culminated with a protest in front of Green Bay
Mhm.
City Hall. And it was confusing because they kept saying we didn't count all the ballots, but then they said we should throw away some of the ballots. So the messaging was super confusing. Even
Mhm.
when they got there, there was literally half the people saying keep counting, and the other half of the people saying throw out all the absentee ballots. So again, we were unsure. So we were calling around, and people said, people are just upset the election didn't go their right way. But then it kept growing. There was protest again in all the wrong places all the
Mhm.
time. We started seeing chatter that there was organizing for a January 6th protest. We called the FBI, we called the sheriff's department, we called our AG, and said, "Hey, we're seeing people talking about that they're going to have to come up with contingency plans, that there's not going to be power, that people were contemplating bringing weapons, that folks were
Mhm.
building up that there might be no power, that there might be physical violence." Again, people were telling us this is exaggeration. Nothing's going to happen on January 6th. You shouldn't worry. Then we saw January 6th happen, and we saw the protest locally. And then we were watching because we were really worried. There were buses that took Green Bay people to Washington, D.C. And these
Mhm.
were known white supremacy groups
Mhm.
and hate groups, and they were coordinating these buses. We had flagged this for law enforcement and the FBI,
Mhm.
saying these are known bad actors in our region. They're sending people to DC. And then we saw that there was a protest being scheduled in Green Bay. And originally it was scheduled to be around the mayor's house, where his wife and
Ooh.
his kids were. Ultimately,
Mhm.
by January 6th, they decided to protest City Hall. Uh,
Mhm.
we evacuated City Hall, but I decided to stay because I thought it was really important that we would get some evidence and just see what happens.
Mhm.
I was one of the few people in City Hall that day, and what we saw is a crowd build up that actually had
Mhm.
my name, the mayor's name, and our
Mhm.
first black clerk's name on their protests, calling us crooked, and that we were going to steal the election, and that we had to physically be stopped by white supremacy groups. And they were in the newspaper calling for it. They were shouting in megaphones. They had American flags, and they had all of these signs that said things like "Don't let undocumented people," which I think they claimed that I was. "Don't let
Mhm.
consultants," which they thought that I was. They thought I worked for Facebook. Again, these weren't people from our community; they were from the
Mhm.
outside. And then we saw the violence erupt in uh, at the Capitol. People were
Mhm.
it was being televised, and then all of a sudden, every single person in the protest dispersed. And
Mhm.
so calls were made because we weren't sure what was going to happen. And in between January 6th and the November election, we were getting death threats on a regular basis
Mhm.
that the mayor should be killed, I should be killed, I should go back to my country. There was homophobic slurs, women were being stalked, videotaped, harassed. folks were being doxxed and information was
Mhm.
being released. And so we thought the worst after January 6th. And then as January
Mhm.
6th happened and police officers were murdered at the Capitol, we had to rethink security at City
Mhm.
Hall. And
Yeah.
so it was probably one of the most terrifying times in my life. My husband wanted me to quit my job because I could not sleep. We actually had to get
Mhm.
an alarm system in one of the safest communities in
Mhm.
the country. I had to work with police to come up with a protection plan. We had to meet with the FBI after all this started happening, and so it completely changed the small town community because of this new weaponization of the weaponization of made up things, and the truth
Mhm.
was not enough to inoculate from it. It did not matter that they were wrong. All of a sudden, we were seeing more threats of violence than we've ever seen for government workers.
Well, thank you so much for telling us that. I know that, I mean, that arrow must have been absolutely hard and terrible and still has probably effects to this day. So I really appreciate you being vulnerable with us too and sharing your experience. Um, so after January, the city began to rebuild, right? To try to have safe elections. So who were some of the different actors that helped rebuild the local democratic system?
So, I mean, I will say, after the political violence, it also got worse before it got better. So the
Oh.
city tried to do some things that we were learning from
Mhm.
international leaders that had dealt with kind of the rise
Mhm.
of authoritarianism and fascist or other techniques around where democracy is either dissolved or is being watered down. And there was
Mhm.
so little research or tools. So one of the things that we try to do is pass a resolution, just acknowledging and lifting up all the poll workers and
Mhm.
that we stand by the city workers that delivered the election.
Mhm.
Six of the members of our common council refused to vote for the
Mhm.
resolution, saying that they could not stand by with all the questions being asked
Mhm.
of the election. Even though we pointed out that there was no evidence of any of this, it did get a majority vote and win, but six
Mhm.
members of our common council said that they didn't have enough information
Mhm.
to stand by our local democracy and stand by our poll workers. And so that was the world that we were
Yeah.
heading into, right? Where these folks, most of which identified as Republicans, were not willing to even say that the election was actually conducted fairly and freely and would not stand by our poll workers in our community. So we had to start thinking about what can we do in response to
Mhm.
this. And because this also launched an investigation by the state legislature,
Mhm.
which that special investigator ended up losing his law license over this investigation, which is Michael Gableman, who tried
Mhm.
to arrest the mayor of Green Bay for
Mhm.
allegedly the crime of rigging the election against Donald Trump. And so he attempted to arrest the mayor of Green Bay, and so what we had to do is actually bring a bunch of different people together of all different
Mhm.
political parties and be focused heavily on the city of Green Bay and say, we have
Mhm.
to stand by democracy. It's not right
Mhm.
and left. It is that our democracy should be able to elect the leaders.
Yeah.
And so we had a really rough election right after that, where there was a rise of MAGA extremists who ran on election conspiracy theories, and they were
Mhm.
backed by billionaires. And they won these elections by so few votes. So the closest vote being less than 10, and the
Mhm.
highest gap being less than 100 votes, because a lot of folks thought the fever dream would pass, and it didn't. And so that
Mhm.
launched 2 years of fake investigations aided
Mhm.
and abetted by the state legislature into the city of Green Bay's elections, till this day have not found a single piece of evidence that there was any malfeasance of
Mhm.
the organization at all. But what that did do is it empowered us to communicate with the community directly. And
Mhm.
so we decided to actually expand early vote in the
Mhm.
face of these threats, including
Mhm.
death threats and harassment and fake investigations. And we were able to bring the community to the table. And we actually expanded voting by talking to the residents of Green Bay, saying, don't you want more democracy, not less?
Mhm.
How can we ensure that there's more transparency and
Mhm.
not fewer? And so we actually expanded to more early vote sites and more hours for the first time in history. And it was great. And so
Mhm.
there really is something there that when we pulled people outside of the political process and went to the community itself, we were able
Mhm.
to expand democracy and not let it get contracted by the bad actors. And we did that with Republicans, Democrats, Independents. We did that with people who vote all the time, people who
Mhm.
this might be the first election. People really wanted to do that. And because of that, we ended up flipping in the next election from a
Mhm.
MAGA majority to a pro-democracy majority in our common council. So it was a really exciting thing where we put people over politics and
Mhm.
people won. And so
Yeah.
truly proud of the city, proud of how we organized it, and proud to say that we did that not in a partisan way, but in a pro-democracy way. And a lot of good things came from making sure that we did that. They attempted to defund our clerk's office, saying that
Mhm.
they wanted to stop all mail-in voting, and we were able to block that effort too with this new coalition that had come
Mhm.
together. So really it was amazing bringing all kinds of different people together to be
Yeah.
democracy.
No, that is amazing. Um, how did you stay positive and focused building after going through everything?
You know, people, you're not the first person to ask me that. I think I have a deep belief in this community, and because I spent so much time in it, I knew that
Mhm.
the extremism that we were seeing in our politics were not reflective of this community
Mhm.
itself. And the thing standing in the way of our pro-democracy community wasn't its people, but it was the politics that were happening at the local, state, and national level. And I
Mhm.
just don't think that we should be bullied by extremists.
Mhm.
I know that seems so simple and so small, but that is a
Mhm.
shared belief in our community that
Mhm.
bad actors shouldn't dictate a bad policy, and that our community liked that their friends and their families and their neighbors ran these elections. They liked that we had more options for them to vote. They liked that they
Mhm.
could do absentee voting or in-person voting. And
Mhm.
so I wanted to make sure that our politics were more reflective of our community and not the other way around. And so my optimism was that all my friends, my neighbors, my colleagues, there was
Mhm.
no disagreement. And so I could not let their hopes and dreams of their government
Yeah.
be dashed by extremists. And so that was what gave me joy and hope, is that if we made our politics more reflective of our communities, there's a
Mhm.
lot of alignment. And so it
Yeah.
was the politics that were the problem. So if that was the only thing that I had to address, that seemed like an easier project than if my community didn't want to stand by our local democracy.
Yeah.
That would have been a less optimistic vision. But the truth is, they wanted us to stand up and fight back and ensure that their vote counted if they chose to do so, and that their vote was reflective of them choosing their leaders, not being harassed or limited in their ability to choose who represented them. And so,
Yeah.
really proud of people of all different political stripes that came together to defeat that level
Yeah.
of extremism.
Yeah. No, it's always amazing to hear that as a native Green Bayan, to know that a representative truly cares about the city and interacting with us, that's just amazing. So thank you for that. So despite the fact that it was a very partisan effort to attack on the attack, you seem very open to cross-partisan work. Why is that?
Well, because I think that the truth is that that extremism doesn't necessarily speak for every Republican, right? And I think that that was a very clear thing. You know,
Mhm.
our former Congressman Reed Ribble was a huge proponent of being pro-democracy. And I thought that was great that he came out on a multitude of occasions. Our Congressman Mike Gallagher condemned the
Mhm.
actions of, or at the time, condemned the actions of January 6th, is that that's not
Mhm.
how we operate. He actually called that we are not a banana republic. We cannot operate this way when elections don't go our way. And so to me, this extremism wasn't necessarily a reflection of just being a Republican. That wasn't the
Mhm.
problem, right? My family is mixed politically, and many of them thought that the threats, the violence was unbecoming of not only any elected official, but of our
Mhm.
democracy in general. And so to me, there is that has always been something to work around, right? That
Mhm.
we may not be aligned in who we vote for president, but there was an alignment that we should not be seeking violence and threats because elections don't go our way.
Mhm.
And so that was actually quite clear. Whether or not people still adopted those platforms or not, I can't control that.
Mhm.
But to me, it is quite clear that the American public has very little tolerance for the extreme behavior that was happening at the
Mhm.
local level. And so it isn't difficult for me to work with people who are interested in a
Mhm.
pro-democracy. And I don't think it would be remiss of us to pretend that there aren't
Yeah.
Republicans who are pro-democracy. I think that that just isn't the way I saw it or I experienced it. It was unfortunate that the people propagating these lies and these efforts were asymmetrical. This was very much rooted in one political candidate and the way that they organized, but that
Mhm.
doesn't mean that they necessarily speak for every single Republican that's ever existed.
Thank you. So before we kind of get into some maybe audience questions, do you have any advice on how to prevent and address any misinformation? Um, I'm just interested in knowing too, just at a personal level, like what can we do to not perpetuate misinformation?
First and foremost, I think that the old adage, ignoring it and it'll go away, does not work. I think we have to take these things up front and be proactive in our levels of transparency. And also, one of the things we saw is meeting some of this misinformation with
Mhm.
humor and clarity, right? People accused us of having little people in the machines who were switching the votes inside the physical counting machine. That was crazy. And we need to be able to say, like, this is crazy, right? These are how our machine, but we also have to be proactive, saying, these are how our machines work. Don't believe all the misinformation you're seeing. It's not about repeating the lies. I think that's a somewhat old adage. It is making sure
Mhm.
that we dispel these opportunities and are very clear about the opportunities for input, for transparency, for
Mhm.
clarity. I think ignoring the problem is how it was able to bubble up and touch
Mhm.
into a very violent reality is because we all kept pretending it would go away and that the
Mhm.
level of ridiculousness could be seen by the people who believed it. It takes a very
Mhm.
small amount of people to enact violence that has reverberating effects in the community. So spot it early,
Mhm.
address it, and be proactive with tools for transparency and activate the people and talk about the stories of the people delivering the democracy that we want, right? We started doing a
Mhm.
campaign to point out that these are the people who are running your elections. You know
Mhm.
them, they're your friends, they're your neighbors, they're police officers, firefighters. These are the people that, and by building trust in the process, instead of
Mhm.
engaging the bad actors, really is a benefit that has residual positive benefits. And so
Mhm.
address it early, be proactive, do not ignore the problem, and highlight the people who are helping to make pro-democracy work and be clear that it's a broad-based coalition who just want you to be able to elect the leader of your choice and that we are following the rules. And I think those are the things that we saw make a lot of an impact in this community. And my personal opinion truly is you also have to stand up for what you believe in, that
Mhm.
democracy isn't a passive sport and that we have to understand that it matters that you are clear that you are a pro-democracy person and that we are not going to tolerate the level of violence and that accountability should be something that we discuss, that it's not
Mhm.
enough to just say that we don't do this, but that people who do enact violence and are harassing individuals should be held accountable to the same standard that we would in any other capacity. And I think those things combined are what will protect our democracy.
Mm. Thank you very much for the advice, Representative. Um, so I would now kind of like to open the discussion up to anyone that has any questions for Representative Ahmad. Um, I also want to ask you if there's anything you would like to close on before we get into the questions.
No, I just think it is a fascinating untold story of the
Mm-hmm.
city having to go through this fight under a Democratic
Yeah.
federal administration that we watch our elections get attacked, we watch people physically get attacked,
Mm-hmm.
and we figured it out by being people oriented and changing
Mm-hmm.
our politics, not changing anything about our community, but ensuring that our community was more involved in transparency and expanding democracy. And I think that story needs to be told more, that
Mm-hmm.
the people of Green Bay stood up for democracy, and that's what changed our
Mm-hmm.
politics. And that is something I'm incredibly proud of.
No, I agree. I am also very proud of hearing how Green Bay stepped up in essence. So thank you very much. Let's see. Let me check the chat. Okay, I don't see anything now. I do have a question for you. That's my question. My question is, was the mistrust in elections rooted more in like a lack of transparency or a lack of information or both?
I don't know, right? Because I think what's interesting is that how can you expect transparency for a community that you don't live in? And so we were having
Yeah.
all these actors ranging from DC operatives to people from red states coming into Green Bay. There are no rules about who can be an observer in the city during election. That's the
Mhm,
power of we are very transparent. But what
mhm,
was used is that there was a weaponization of people who didn't know how the process worked, who didn't
mhm,
really seek out to learn, and then questioned everything that existed. And that was a really interesting dynamic because we had answers, but everything was new to these individuals. And so there was a natural distrust of us for
mhm.
whatever reason. And because they were outsiders, then it became hard to convince them
Yeah.
to do that. So, we try to meet that kind of
Mhm,
questioning with transparency. And
mhm,
so that I think was positive for us. We're like, well,
mhm,
how can we be even more transparent? But like I said,
mhm,
we did a live stream for 24
mhm,
hours, one of the few communities in the country that did that. We had an open process that anyone can come in and out of. We let people of every political party observe and get
mhm,
involved. They were part of recounts, and that was not enough. So that was what we did just during the election. And
mhm,
even with all of that, did not prevent the bad actors from
mhm,
harassing and potentially enacting violence against people. So it wasn't that we weren't transparent, but I do think that we were unprepared for the level of
mhm.
misinformation and that our transparency solutions were never equipped to handle people who thought that there were little people in the machines because there was no cameras in the machines. Right, that people who believed that there was two internets, even though the machines didn't connect to the internet.
Yeah.
People who thought I worked for Facebook, like even though I clearly worked for the city. We
Mhm,
were unprepared for those kind of questions and
mhm.
concerns. So it's almost like the transparency would have never addressed that. We
Yeah.
did, however, get more articulate and started coming up with better tools for transparency
Mhm,
earlier on, so that there was something it taught us that by being more transparent in a more data specific, clear way, we did
mhm,
help everyday people who didn't have the same questions feel
mhm.
like they could be well informed. And that was very powerful. But I'm not sure. I think when bad actors have very high people in high places repeating these claims, there's an assumption that they know something that they don't. We could not
Yeah.
stop people from doing that. And I think ultimately that was the most dangerous aspect of it.
Thank you. Paul?
Hey, Ahmad, thanks a lot for being here. Great to see you again. Um, I think one of the striking things about the story is in WISACT, I think part of what we're trying to do is help people develop democracy skills. And it seems like you all in Green Bay developed a lot of new skills in carrying out democracy, which is really cool. That's just a observation. My question is, now that you're in the state legislature, have you found opportunities where, I mean, maybe you've developed some ways of doing things that people in the Capitol here need to learn from? And I guess secondly, what's your outlook on cross-partisan work in Wisconsin right now, based on your experience so far?
Uh, well, in the legislature, we are putting some, pen to paper kind of policy. So, for example, I just recently introduced a bill that wouldn't allow for a single individual to launch partisan funded legal fights, which almost exclusively the legislature spends $26 million on tip partisan legal battles that were actually approved by one person. And 25% of that was actually against Green Bay for or about elections. And so I introduced a bill that would say that everyone gets a voice, that has to get a majority of vote for any lawsuits or legal representation. And so by adding more democracy to even something as simple as legal consequences is something that I see as putting some democracy tools into practice. Obviously, supporting general democracy elements, protections for election workers, the lack of stopping harassment for elections and poll workers and city staff and municipal workers, the harassments were bipartisan, meaning that even folks in Republican districts were getting harassed and stalked by these extreme activists that believe that the election was stolen. So there's some really good things that are being generated in Madison to kind of bring into fruition some of the things that we learned in Green Bay. We'll see what happens with those. Still looking for bipartisan support. We're also looking to help limit the ability of billionaires to impact our elections, because we saw that that was one of the ways in which misinformation was spread, is that unlimited money into lies was one of the many ways that kind of egged on some of this bad behavior. So I also introduced and introducing some more bills too on limiting the ability of folks to bribe, harass, or give unlimited funds to these kind of election conspiracy theories generally, or impact our election. So some of the democracy tools are, and there is openness there. What that looks like from a cross-partisan standpoint, as you all know, we just recently got fairer maps in Wisconsin, literally less than we're a year into those maps, or a year and a half into those maps, after nearly 20 years of an extreme gerrymander that was one of the worst in the entire country. And so I still think people are shaking loose from a legislature that did not need to engage people across the political spectrum. And so I still think it's finding its footing on how to create more partisan efforts. But we are seeing some cracks in the positive way into the old way of doing things. There's some bipartisan bills I'm working on. There is like a new crop of people who want to work together. So, I always think it's important to fix the structures. And when you fix the structures, you start seeing behavior improve. And so, do I think we're in a place where it doesn't matter who you vote for president? You can work across party lines to get things done. I don't think we're there just yet, but I do think there is hope that we are seeing the new crop of people who are coming through these gerrymandered maps being much more open to collaboration than we saw in the previous decades. And I'm very excited to see that and be a part of that solution.
Thank you. Here. You can ask your question.
Let's quit.
Ellis.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Maud. It's Elizabeth Ellis with the Oneida Nation. How are you doing?
Very good.
Thank you for speaking today. It was very interesting. I never heard that story from you, so I really appreciate you opening up and sharing your story. It was very inspiring to listen to. We met recently in Madison, and I kind of was telling you I'm getting my foot in the door here. And so one of my projects is our Get Out the Vote strategy for the Oneida Nation. Our mission is to get the Oneida membership out there, educated, voting, and kind of combating that misinformation as well. So I guess I'm looking for any sort of advice that how we can get out there, spread, get them educated. I know there's so many different platforms, but we have such a huge elder population too. We've been trying QR codes and it's not working. Or we engage in Facebook Live or YouTube Live, and it does get good views, but then they can't understand how to comment or get their questions answered. So just wondering what you've seen as successful for education. We've been partnering with Wisconsin Native Vote as well. I do want to commend our area because tribal IDs are valid forms of IDs for voting. So we really haven't had any issues in the last couple of years, maybe one, and then we got out there, educated that poll worker, and since then, no issues. So I wanted to commend our area on the use of tribal IDs and recognizing those. So again, thank you for your time and allowing me to ask a question.
Yeah. Here's what what I've learned a little bit is that while I think technology feels sexy to a lot of us data nerds and democracy nerds, that democracy is its best when it shows up where people are at. And what I mean by that is we started doing our clerk, which is great, started doing old school presentations in retirement homes and assisted living, that we went to faith institutions and other places. We started going where people were at to let them know about early voting. Two of our early voting sites, one was a Packer tailgate area and Lambeau Field, and the other one was a faith institution, right? And so we picked physical places that resonated with people, not that resonated with kind of the kind of nerdy population that I think I am. I'm like a hyper democracy nerd. And so what I might think is the greatest place may not be the place that everyday people find their space. And so I think we should always bring technology in. I think we should get modern and new techniques. But I do think showing up where people are at when they're at them is a really great way to bring democracy right to their table and find ways to get them connected. Do they know where their polling location is? Do they even know who their elected officials are? Do they even know when the elections are happening? Is early
Mhm.
vote an option for them? We've seen a lot of people love the use of early vote, and they've really been excited about using early vote in our community. That might be kind of an innovation. And so I think what's the innovation in the democracy space versus the innovation for everyday people to connect their empowerment to voting in every election don't always match up. And so I have to remind people, and you know your community so much better than someone like me would. I bet there are, I went to the powwow, for example, an absolutely incredible space. There wasn't that many people registering folks to vote at the powwow, right? And so that was, oh, what a missed opportunity. We've seen some other events that the nation has done, and I'm like, oh, how can I do a better job of injecting democracy in a way that's both culturally appropriate and respectful of that community, but also encourages them that we're all a part of these communities. And so,
Mhm.
I've been trying to do nonpartisan engagement there. So I'm very proud of the work you've already been doing. You've been doing a great job. If there was any advice, is I think sometimes being very simple and showing up where people exactly are and building from there seems to be something that we've seen encouraged. Like we, went on the UWGB campus, and there is a polling location on the UWGB campus, and we've been activating people in that space because that's a very unique place to do that work.
Mhm.
And we've seen a robust engagement from students, even in local elections, including in the Supreme Court race. And so there is something magical about showing up where people are in the ways that they're typically used to showing up. But I don't know. What do you think about any of those?
Yeah, right when you said faith-based institutions, I'm like, okay, we have like four churches just on the reservation, just in Oneida specifically, but overall on the reservations, there's plenty more. And then our Anna John resident care facility also is just it's like an assisted living and retirement home, and our elder meal site is located in that building. So I'm sure Tana's probably went through these, but just kind of restart the conversation on how we can get to those populations as well. So I appreciate it.
Until Tana, I said hi.
Oh, I will.
Hmm. We have about 4 minutes. We had one question in the chat, if you would be willing to tackle that before we end. Um,
Yeah.
by Courtney. If I were to have a chance, well, to have a question, it would have been around confronting misinterpretations and misinformation with AI. So how do we confront AI misinformation?
So what's interesting about that, we haven't seen that rise as much as other. There was a kind of deep concern about this given what happened in 2020.
Mhm.
We That's saying it won't be a problem. It hasn't risen to that place. They're just making things up. They haven't impersonated people's voices. They haven't
Mhm.
put my head on a fake body, shredding ballots. I'm not saying that's not coming. I'm saying
Mhm.
for some reason they're not that sophisticated. it might be what makes it so dangerous is that it's oddly simple. It's I saw them do this, or they can't prove that they didn't shred the ballots, or it's the things that don't actually attach to reality, but that could be believable based on how you approach the work, not that they have any physical evidence. I mean, to this day, there was not a single piece of evidence that anything had happened or any malfeasance happened in local Green Bay elections. Literally, what people now say is that we should have done more marketing. That was like now millions of dollars, people who were given death threats, harassment. The biggest feedback has been, oh, we should have just spent more money on marketing and comms, and maybe this would have never happened. Right. And so doesn't mean that AI won't have that problem. We just haven't seen the bad actors be that sophisticated. Usually it's a Facebook post, a Reddit post that goes viral. It's an individual doing a video that says, you just can't trust these people. I heard that this person's really undocumented and you can't trust somebody that's undocumented. I mean, it really is so simple that it almost shouldn't be believable, but they're not even faking the speeches or the photos. They're
Yeah.
just saying what they believe, and people are taking what they're saying without evidence as truth. And so maybe AI could also be helpful in the opposite way. I actually think there might be some ways in which AI could see through things that are rising up in social media that might be false or inaccurate, and flagging that for people to communicate on. So there could be an actual really positive role for AI to be like, this isn't accurate, or this never happened, or flagging it for people to intervene. So I actually think there's probably a better way for AI to be helpful than it is for it to be producing. We did see internationally that there's been some really big AI blowups, including people faking speeches that have happened, and they had to start the election over again, which would have caused riots in Green Bay or in the United States. But internationally, there was a case in which there was some propaganda that was produced by AI, and that actually resulted in an election being done over. But I have not seen that here locally.
Okay, thank you so much. So we are out of time now, but again, I would love to thank Representative Ahmad for joining us and sharing your incredible story. The first time I ever met you, I was completely inspired, and I know that a lot of people here are inspired by you as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for having this conversation. Just because 2020 isn't over, I think we have some lessons learned, and we never want to repeat the worst parts of our history. So I'm just thankful for your leadership and the leadership of all the folks that are involved in this, because I think our democracy is best when we are protecting it and making sure there's more of it. And you all are helping to do that here in Wisconsin. So deeply grateful for all of the work you're doing on this issue. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.